This is Dave Wallace. I'm the Research Director at the Workforce Training Board, and I am going to present to you the first two chapters of the TAP plan. They are the economic chapter and the demographic chapter. For many of you, this may be familiar. We've presented this to you before at several board meetings, myself and Coral Gary and other of our researchers. For those of you that haven't seen it, hopefully this will be new. If you have any questions on it, at the end of the presentation, you can see our contact information. Once again, I'll jump into that, and hopefully this will be of use. The biggest picture of economy is that showing gross domestic product, and you can see in this chart that it has generally been upward, both for the state as well as our country. There you can see the dip during the pandemic, but we have recovered well above pre-pandemic levels, and we're back pretty much to trend levels. So the overall picture here is quite good. We see a similar picture with employment in this slide. You can see that we've now recovered to employment levels above that of the pandemic. Washington's doing a little bit better than the country as a whole. However, note that we have not recovered yet to trend levels. So this is a good, but not quite as good of a picture as we're seeing with gross domestic product. Overall, we know that the state is doing quite well. Our current state average earnings are over $83,000, almost $84,000. That would put us at the fourth highest among all states. The national average is 69,000, almost 70,000. King County is what is driving that. In King County, the average earnings are over almost 114,000. If we take out King County, the state average would drop to 62,000, which would drop us as a state all the way down to the 24th highest earning. So what we're seeing here in terms of earning is that overall our average numbers are quite good. However, that is driven largely by King County, and if you take that out, the state is somewhat more average. All other counties outside of King County are actually earning below that average. The industrial makeup of our employment goes a long way toward explaining this, why King County is such a high performing county and why it's driving the overall numbers. You can see, for example, information. This industry is the highest earning industry on average. The folks in that industry were earning $268,502 in 2021. That was the highest paying industry. It would be followed by management of companies and enterprises, professional, scientific, and technical services, finance, and utilities. You can see that those are the top green industries listed in this chart. Below, you can see in orange the lowest earning industries. At the very bottom of that chart is accommodation food services, where the average annual wage was only 28,000. Agriculture was the second lowest, just over 37,000, and followed by arts, entertainment, and recreation. So to look at where these industries are located across our state, you can do something called a location quotient, which looks at the share of an industry's employment compared to the larger. So for example, let's say we divided the state up into four areas: rural west, rural east, urban west. And in each of these areas, we looked at the share of employment. So for example, if you look at the top left-hand corner there, agriculture in rural west, you get a 1.23. What that means is that agriculture in rural west was a little bit over proportional. 1.0 would be exactly proportional to the employment share of the state. If you move over one, look at the agriculture in rural east, you can see the number 6.04. And what that means is that in the rural east, agriculture employment is 6 times more concentrated than it is for the state as a whole. Now, and then follow that over to the urban west, you can see that it was a 0.21. So the share in the urban west of agriculture is less, or just about 20% of that of the state as a whole. Now, if you remember the previous slide looking at higher paying industries, lower paying industries, we can see that this shows you the highest paid industries: information, finance, professional scientific services, management of companies. If you remember, those are the high ones. And if you look over to the right, you could see that these are concentrated in urban west. All of these are over 1.0, and you can see that they're below 1.0 in all of these other 4 regions. Now, conversely, we can look at those lower paying industries from the previous slide. You remember agriculture was on there, education services, arts, entertainment, accommodation, and other services. And you'll note that these industries tend to be much more concentrated outside of the urban west and the Puget Sound region. We can see something similar in terms of occupations. This chart shows you the highest growing occupations in terms of openings. You can see that software developers was the highest. What we did then, we looked at that particular occupation share of employment in King County and the average wage. You can see that, for example, software developers, 87% of all employment of software developers was in King County, and they had an average wage of $145,000. Note the color coding shows you how the predominance of that given occupation as a share in King County, as well as the average annual wage. At the other end of the scale, you can see toward the bottom of that, farm workers and laborers, only 3% of farm workers and laborers were in King County, and you can see that the average wage was just over $33,000. To switch over to the view that businesses are getting, we took a look at distressed businesses by workforce development and ownership. This is data that comes from Dun & Bradstreet. You can see that there's our percentages of businesses that are distressed, and what that means is these are businesses that are, according to the analysis by Dun & Bradstreet, expected in the next quarter to be in distress. You can see that overall there's not a whole lot of difference when we break it out by WDC. However, there is quite a bit of difference looking at it, say, by small business, minority owned, and female owned compared to none of the above. You can see, for example, that small businesses had a total distressed rate of just under 10%. Minority owned had a distress rate of 13.5%, and female owned had a distress rate of 12%. Now that compares to just under 8% for businesses that are neither small, minority, nor female owned. We also wanted to get a sense of where businesses are having trouble hiring. Are they having trouble? Are they being able to fill jobs? And one way to look at that is through the Bureau of Labor Statistics does a survey looking at job openings, and they publish, in this chart you can see national openings by industry and quits by industry. This is for the year 2022. Overall, what we can see is that accommodation food services had the highest openings rate, as professional services also had a quite high rate, and healthcare. In terms of quits, you can see that accommodation followed by retail were the sectors that had the highest levels of quits. We can also look at data comparing, putting together a ratio of the number of unemployed to the number of job openings, and we're seeing that for both the state of Washington and the United States as a whole. And what you can see is that it is very dependent upon the economy. You can see back during the Great Recession, the numbers were quite high. Washington State reached about 7, meaning that there were about 7 unemployed persons per job opening. And then again in the pandemic, and you can see that we reached, actually went over that. So there were more than 7 unemployed persons per job opening. Since then, you can see that this rate has fallen now to the point where there's actually fewer than 1 unemployed person per job opening, both for Washington State and the country as a whole. Now I'd like to switch over and look at the demographics of the state's workforce. In this particular case, what we'll be doing is looking at groups such as breaking out our data by ethnicity, race, sex, and look at things such as unemployment rates, educational attainment, earnings, and so forth. This first slide has a lot on it. Some of it's not surprising, such as the connection between higher education attainment and lower unemployment rates. Also, high unemployment rates for those with a disability. In terms of race, we can see that Asians and whites have the lowest unemployment rates, while Native Americans, followed by blacks, have the highest. Generally speaking, there's a lesser disparity by geography ethnicity and sex, but those disparities are not insignificant. And in the following slides, we'll kind of delve into more of the detail here. This chart shows you trends of unemployment rates by race. Overall, we can see that Asians and whites consistently had lower unemployment rates. Other groups consistently had higher unemployment rates, but they were also more affected by volatility within the wider economy. These rates can also vary by sex within the race. Overall, for most races, men have a lower unemployment rate than do women. However, this pattern is reversed for black men who had a 4% percentage points higher than unemployment rate for black women. This chart shows you trends in the unemployment rate for sexes, and overall, you can see they track pretty closely. However, where you see the real distinction is where during these economically volatile times, such as the Great Recession and the pandemic, where men did much worse during the Great Recession, and then they did somewhat worse in the early stages of the pandemic. But overall, again, they trended pretty closely. This chart shows you unemployment rate by sex and education attainment. As we've noted previously, there's a strong correlation between educational attainment and lower unemployment rates. Generally speaking, though, that does apply. However, women with less than a high school diploma had much higher unemployment rates than men, nearly twice as high. When you move over to the bachelor's degree and above, it was nearly the identical unemployment rates. This chart shows you unemployment rates by geography and education. And as we've noted, of course, there's that correlation between education and low unemployment rates. However, if we look at it by geography, we can see that generally speaking, unemployment rates were lowest in urban West and rural East. However, if you look just specifically at bachelor's degree and above, the urban East actually had the lowest unemployment rates. This chart shows you longer-term trends of educational attainment. We can see that overall there is a trend towards increasing shares of those earning a bachelor's degree or above, and decreasing shares of those with some college or AA. This chart shows you educational attainment broken out by race. And what we can see is that Asians had the highest percent earning a bachelor's degree or above, and they were followed by whites. Overall, 15% of American Indians did not earn a high school diploma, which is twice the percentage of blacks and Asians. American Indians also had the largest percentage of people with whose highest level of education was a high school diploma or equivalent, that being 32%. There's a strong connection between educational attainment and earnings. In this chart, you can see the trends of earnings by race over time. Overall, what we're seeing is that these disparities that exist are actually increasing. While Asian and white people's earnings have increased, Black, American Indian, and multiracial workers' earnings have stagnated. Overall, Asians have the highest median earnings in 2021 at just over 80,000, followed by whites at just over 64,000. This chart shows you trends in earnings broken out by Hispanic versus non-Hispanic, and you can see that consistently non-Hispanics have been earning somewhat more than Hispanics. This is likely due to lower educational attainment among Hispanic compared to non-Hispanic populations. Similarly, we can see that men's earnings have consistently been higher than women's earnings over the last 10 years. Overall, women have been earning about 70% of that of men in the state. Additionally, this gap nationwide has not changed very much over the past 2 decades. When we do look at young earners, the gap has narrowed. Educational attainment, occupational segregation, and work experience have historically explained that pay gap, but women have made gains in these dimensions. This chart shows you median earnings by disability status and broken out by educational attainment. Overall, you can see that individuals with a disability have median earnings of about just over 46,000, and that compares to a little over 60,000 for individuals without a disability. This difference may at least in part be explained by the fact that there's a smaller percentage of the disabled population that has earned a bachelor's degree or higher. So in other words, that educational attainment connection to earnings, we can see that playing out here as well. So that is our slideshow. Once again, if you have questions, you can see my contact information as well as Coral's, and you can also find our contact information on our agency's website. Hope that this was informative, and let us know if you have any questions. Thank you.